And we are now live. You're ready to go.
Good evening, UWLA family. For those of you who don't know, my name is Robert Brown, and I'm the president of the University of West Los Angeles. And I'm delighted to invite you to our first President's Panel Chat with my esteemed guest this afternoon, or this evening, I should say. Uh, when we were pre-COVID, I had the habit of walking the halls of the classrooms and poking my head in to kind of have an opportunity to interface and interact with the students and professors. Obviously, that hasn't been the case for quite some time now. So we thought that in lieu of that, and in the interim, we'd host these President's Panel Chats as a way of connecting with our faculty, connecting with our students, connecting with our outside UWA family, and also introducing some of our more esteemed colleagues, alumni, and people connected to the university. So we will be hosting these from time to time over the course of the next year, even after COVID hopefully subsides. Again, let me introduce you to our panelists this evening. Um, First of all, we have Mr. Ori Blumenfeld, Esquire. Mr. Blumenfeld is a senior associate at Margellus Faith LLP. They focus on insolvency law, representing both debtors and creditors, and Chapter 11 reorganizations as well as trustees. He also represents state and federal court receivers and partition referees. Mr. Blumenfeld also serves as chair of the Human Relations Commission for the City of Beverly Hills, and he is a member of the Board of Managers for the University of West Los Angeles. Welcome, Mr. Blumenfeld. It's good to have you here. And last but not least, he is also an alum of the class of 2007. Next, Mr. Professor Anthony Seferian. Professor Safarian is an adjunct professor of law at the University of West LA School of Law. He has taught at UWLA since 2013 and currently teaches real property and trial advocacy. He was an essay grader for the California Bar Examination for 5 years and has graded thousands of California Bar Exam essays. Mr. Professor Safarian is also a deputy attorney general in the California Department of Justice, where he has worked for the past 20 years. Currently, he is a member of the Attorney General's Civil Rights Enforcement Section in the Constitutional Policing Unit. Previously, he worked in the Attorney General's Health, Education, and Welfare Section. He also joined UWLA faculty, and where he, again, has taught for us numerous subjects over the course of the last several years. Professor Safarian, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Last but certainly not least, someone who I've known for quite some time now, and I'm very honored that she is also part of our panel. Attorney Latasha Wells Amerson. Latasha Wells Amerson began her law enforcement career with the Los Angeles Airport Police in 1992 and graduated from Rio Hondo Police Academy Class 109. She is an accomplished attorney practicing in the area of estate planning, an adjunct professor at California State University, Dominguez Hills, a nonprofit founder and author. She also holds the distinction of being the first female officer to obtain the newly implemented rank of commander. She is the assistant chief of operations for the largest command at airport police, managing patrol, traffic and security, crisis intervention teams, and the crime task force. Attorney Amerson is an alum of UWLA. She has received a certification in women's entrepreneurship from Cornell University. Attorney Amerson, welcome. I should say Commander Amerson, welcome. Thank you for being a part of our panel this afternoon.
It's my pleasure.
Great. What I'd like to start out this panel is have each of you very briefly talk about your personal and professional backgrounds. Give us a little bit of insight to who you are as people And I'll start with you, Attorney Amerson.
I knew that you would do that. Ladies first, right?
That's right.
As the President Brown indicated, I started my law enforcement career in 1992. So I have 29 years of law enforcement service. But that wasn't my first job. I also worked as a school bus driver. So I have a lot of interaction with children. And so it's also one of the main reasons why I started a nonprofit to mentor young people. And that's outside of my career. I have been working as a practicing attorney, first started out in family law, actually. But because I was also working full-time as a lieutenant at the time, I didn't have as much time to litigate or whatnot. So I also had to figure out a niche that works just right for me, where I would be able to provide a certain level of service to my clients and also continue on with my work in law enforcement. Is going to UWLA was a dream for me. And it took a certain person to help me figure out that I needed to follow through on what they told me, what I told them that I would do. So my history with UWA is a very warm one. And it started with me telling somebody that I was gonna go to law school. And I checked into it and it didn't seem like it was gonna work for me at that moment. But when I saw this person who happened to also be a professor teaching, I think at the time in your paralegal studies, that individual, Billie Jean Brown was her name. She told me, I had just made sergeant, and she said, "Hey, you told me you were going to law school. I know this sergeant thing that's great and all, but you told me you were going to go to law school." And so it was because of her urging that I followed through, I pushed through on figuring out how I could actually go to law school and still continue to be a full-time police officer. And I found that in UWLA. So I've done a lot of great things with this education. And so you don't necessarily have to practice 100% of your time. You can be doing other things and you'll see how much it enriches your life as well. So it's been a great thing for me.
Thank you. Thank you. Attorney Blumenfeld, how about you, sir?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. I definitely had a much more of the generic route to law school. I came from parents that pretty much, said you will be a doctor, lawyer, accountant, pick one. And fun, I was never good at math, and blood wasn't my thing, so law school was always the route for me. I was born and raised in LA, as I'm sure many of our viewers are. LAUSD, bred, educated. After graduating Berkeley, I took off a couple of years, which was very wise in my own experience, to take off a few years and get a little life experience before coming back and focusing as a law student. After graduating, the economy had pretty much collapsed in 07, 08, the mortgage crisis. And I found myself doing bankruptcy work. And I had never studied that in law school, never took a class on it, but sort of fell into it, sort of fell in love with it, and even more so, sort of fell in love with the ability to give people a fresh start and to help them out and to succeed and watch them grow in the second chapters of their lives. And that's kind of how I fell into the profession. It was just the economy kind of dictated it for me. I had the privilege at some point, Professor Barrett always knew that teaching also was kind of in my blood. And so he had me hired as an adjunct professor at the University of Laverne, where he teaches as well, which was a wonderful experience. And as Professor Brown kindly introduced, I'm also a city commissioner in Beverly Hills on the Human Relations Commission. Definitely have a path and an intent on eventually running for city council here in Beverly Hills. Serve on a couple of boards, including the esteemed board of managers for this law school and university, which has been nothing short of an honor when President Brown called me and asked me to join. And then, I think my focus is really working with alumni and getting them more involved in the university as our university continues to grow and succeed. And that's where I'm at right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Seferian, how about you, sir?
I was also born and raised in Los Angeles County. And after law school, I started working in litigation firms, small litigation firms in Los Angeles, doing criminal defense and also civil litigation, first on the plaintiff side and then on the defense side. And I also worked for the California Appellate Project, the Second District Court of Appeal in Los Angeles. I was on the California Appellate Project panel representing indigent appellants in the Court of Appeal in criminal cases. And I moved to Sacramento and I decided to try to go and do public service. And that's when I joined the Attorney General's office in Sacramento. And as President Brown mentioned, I started in the health, education, welfare section, doing litigation in that section. And then about 13 years ago, I joined the civil rights enforcement section. And I moved back to Los Angeles in 2013. When I was in Sacramento, I was teaching at Lincoln Law School of Sacramento and absolutely loved teaching. And so when I moved back to Los Angeles, that's when I started teaching for UWLA. Teaching is a calling for me and one of my passions. And as President Brown mentioned, I'm currently in the civil rights enforcement section in the Attorney General's office in Los Angeles.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Safarian. Thanks to all of you. Let me pose this question to each of you, and we'll go back. We'll start with you first, Ori. How did you find UWLA? What was your experience during law school? How were you in particular challenged during the course of your law school studies? And how were you prepared for the bar?
It's an interesting question. I mean, we're really going far back now. I think it was actually my father that found UWLA for me when I started telling him, okay, I think after taking off a couple of years, it's time to get serious again and start this chapter of my life. So I think he had met a former alumni of the law school, and the name escapes me, but actually I can give thanks to my father for introducing me to the law school. And this is back when it was at the Oxnard on the Oxnard Street campus. So we have him to thank for that. I'd say generally, taking off a couple of years, I was excited to get back to being a student, let alone a law student. I was lucky enough to have a very close knit class, and many of us are still very close in our class, and we constantly are calling each other and bouncing off legal ideas and referring cases to each other. So I was pretty lucky. My class is actually very close back then and even now. So I think that added to the positive experience. I think we had amazing professors. We had extracurricular activities, which I was involved with. And, since birth till today, and including in law school, I was always very active wherever I was. I would say it definitely prepared me. It's one of the only universities that requires all bar topics to be for you to take classes in. I think some of the other universities you kind of can choose if you want to take a class in a bar required course. I think UWLA makes that mandatory for you to take them all, and that was definitely helpful. So you're not studying a topic, something like remedies for the first time when you're studying for the bar. You already have a familiarity with it. I don't know if they still do it now per se, but I remember when I was in law school, we had some pretty tough professors that still employed the Socratic method. And at the time, that definitely got you ready, if not so much for the theory of law, definitely for the practice of law and being an associate at a bigger firm. So today I say thank you to those professors that kept me up at night in fear of responding incorrectly. So for that, I entered the practice of law just ready to go, and I have the university to thank for that.
Thank you, Ori. Professor Seferian, how about your background? How about your law school experience?
I thought for law school, the biggest challenge for me was all the material, the voluminous material, trying to digest all of that, trying to absorb all of that, and the complexity of the material. And I also, like Ori, I took a lot of bar courses. I think that's very important. I think it really helps prepare for the bar exam to take as many bar courses as possible, in addition to taking a bar review course. And I think it's also very helpful to try to rely on the help of others in law school. I don't think there's really many of us who go to law school all by ourselves. I think it requires, for most of us, support of family and friends, professors, deans, other law school employees, friends, to get through all the challenges and the ups and downs of law school. And I also found it helpful to try to explore different areas of law while I was in law school, to try to take some courses in areas that I wasn't really familiar with, and also to volunteer with organizations that I was interested in. I think it's helpful in law school to try to start looking at different areas of law that you think you might be interested in, so that you'll be prepared once you get out of law school to have a better idea of what type of law you want to go into.
Thank you. Thank you. Commander Amerson, how about you?
So my experience with, as I stated earlier, with UWLA was really a connection through somebody that taught there as well, who happened to work very closely with my department at the time. And our court liaison had introduced me to this particular professor, actually at a work-related, like college fair that they were having at the airport. And so that's how it all sort of started. But finding it and finding that it was the right place for me was like really key to my access to law school. In fact, because I had reached out to other law schools before, but you know, they want you to not work or work part-time because they don't think that you can pass the bar or be successful if you work a lot of hours. And I'm living proof that that may be the case for some, but it's doable if you put your mind to it and you have the right infrastructure around you. And that includes making sure that you are at the right educational institution. And for me, UWLA was just right. It was a very pleasurable experience, and it also had many, many challenges for me, particularly, as I stated, at the time that I started law school, I was a new sergeant on the job, and shortly after I started law school, we had 9/11. And so what this meant was that we were on some of the most grueling shifts. The least of them was a 10-hour shift that you had to work, where you had to give up one of your days off. So you worked the 10-hour shifts and only still get 2 days off. For me, that meant essentially briefing cases in the locker room on my lunch break. And then I also got pregnant. And so I was having a baby and I had a lot of complications and I ended up on bed rest. But with the help of the dean of the school at the time and some of my classmates passing on the messages and the lectures, sending them to me through the mail like every week. It really was something that at the end of it, when my child was born and was healthy and 9/11 was, you know, people were traveling again, it really felt like we had all done something together because we had pretty much worked together to pull me through law school. And so it was just the right infrastructure for me, and finding it was very close in proximity to where I lived and also where I worked. So that proximity helped, and just the accessibility of the professors, the administrative staff, and all that really made the experience very worthwhile for me.
Wow, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Great story. My next question to each of you is we've got a lot of students out there in our audience this evening. Would you provide them some insights on your professional career? You know, how did you find your present position, and how do you like to practice the law and your present role in the law? Professor Safarian, I'll start with you.
As I mentioned, I wanted to go into public service, and that's why I decided to join the Attorney General's office. and I find it to be really extremely rewarding. It's a very large office. There's over 1,000 attorneys and there's over 5,000 employees. And there's a lot of different areas of law that the office practices. There's a civil division that represents state agencies and employees in civil litigation and giving advice. There's a criminal division that fulfills the Attorney General's constitutional role in criminal cases. And then there's the Public Rights Division, which works in areas of consumer protection, environmental protection, and civil rights. There's also a Bureau of Medi-Cal Fraud and Elder Abuse, and a Solicitor General's unit. So there's a wide variety of areas of law that are available in the Attorney General's office. And it's very rewarding to work in the public service and try to do good for people and for the state of California. And it's very fulfilling. And I'm working with extremely dedicated attorneys who are also committed to public service. And there's also the opportunity to work on cases from the inception, from start to finish, and interesting cases and cases that have sometimes a cutting edge effect on the law and that can make a difference in people's lives. And also the Attorney General's office is strongly committed to diversity and inclusion in employment and hiring. And that's also very important to me. And it's also a civil service position. So it's a very rewarding area of law to practice in.
Professor Seferian, if I could, a lot of our students are struggling with, in terms of considering their professional careers. They want to go into public service on the one hand, but they hear about how much money the attorneys are making out there in private practice and other areas. Tell us about how you struck that balance. You know, how did you decide that, you know, the biggest influence for you was going to be public service vis-a-vis, you know, going out into the private sector and really focusing on making money?
Yeah, I think that's an important consideration. Obviously, one has to consider their finances when they're deciding what type of career to go into. And working in public service is not the most financially lucrative area to go into. But I think an attorney also has to consider what's going to bring them fulfillment and satisfaction in the work. And so I think it's important to strike that balance. And in my experience, the attorneys who are most satisfied and get the most joy out of their work are the attorneys who are working in an area of law that they're really interested in and that brings them fulfillment, and who didn't necessarily go for the most lucrative, financially lucrative position that was available. So I think a person can still make it work in public service and receive fulfillment from their work and joy in their work at the same time.
Very, very, very wise. Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Attorney Blumenfeld, how about you, sir?
So as I said before, you know, I kind of fell into the practice in insolvency and representing debtors, creditors, trustees, receivers in reorganizations and in receiverships and refereeships. And that kind of just was how the economy, you know, rolled when I had graduated. And, you know, sadly today with the COVID-19 pandemic, it looks like we're going to have another, you know, major bump in our practice that, you know, will carry us for a while. So it's kind of it's kind of like the jeweler during the holidays and Valentine's Day. But in this case, you know, when the economy is hurting, our area is thriving. And I just ended up thriving in it, and I really enjoy the bankruptcy community. It's a very close-knit community, and at this point, I couldn't imagine practicing in another field. And as for just, you know, being a lawyer, I mean, I don't know what else I could do at this point. It's in my blood. It's the way I think. It's the way I process and analyze and go about my day, whether, I'm on the clock or not. And, it's a career that at this point, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. I do work in private practice and, I do work in corporate, but, to that end, and I'm listening to Professor Seferian's comments, I still believe in public service, and, kind of my way to give back is my involvement in the city that I reside in, and being an appointed commissioner and having a goal to eventually run for council. And, that's kind of my way to give back after a day of litigating.
A lot of our students don't really know a lot about bankruptcy and bankruptcy law and how that combines with, various business activities of organizations. So give them a little bit more insight. Attorney Blumenfeld, a corporate client comes to you. They've been experiencing really tough times. They've tried to be a good corporate responsible citizen, but now things are a little bit overwhelming financially. Why does our society allow them to have this second chance, and what does that second chance entail?
Sure. So, under the bankruptcy code, it's basically giving, an entity, which is also a living, breathing thing, just like an individual, it gives them a fresh start. Not every person or entity that goes bankrupt, is a, quote unquote deadbeat. There's just unfortunate circumstances. My mother likes to ask, I don't get it. How is someone or an entity filing bankruptcy, and how do you get paid? And it's not that their business or, whatever they do isn't operating or they're not making money. It's just their debts, their liabilities exceed what they make. So in this case, generally in Chapter 11, it's reorganization to get that business back on its feet with a fresh start and dealing with the creditors, either, being able to pay them pennies on a dollar or discharging entirely what they owe and letting them continue, especially for, the good companies. It's really fulfilling to see a company that just, had a bad deal, emerge and thrive once again.
Thank you. Thank you for those insights. Commander Amerson, how about you?
So my story is sort of interesting because I do practice law as a sole practitioner. But again, I also spent a good majority of my time in public safety as a public servant. So in terms of my practice, though, I started out practicing in family law, and family law was something that did interest me at the time. But I also had somebody that was willing to mentor me to help me along as a sole practitioner into the practice of law, because running a law practice is running a business. So it's not just about knowing what you need to know in the law as a practitioner. You've got to know how to be a staunch business person as well. So a lot of times what you find is the opportunities that you have to learn more about what topics in law you're interested in will be surrounded by the people that you also have access to. And in my case, I had access to a really kind attorney, David Roxtalis, who took me under his wing and taught me everything I needed to know about family law. But I also had an interest in doing stuff that didn't require about fighting over which way the toilet paper was sitting on the roll. I mean, family law is a very litigious type of law, but there's other transactional types of law that you can perform for people and give them a peace of mind. And I found that in family law, there was a psychology that people go through when they're going through a divorce, frankly, or when there's a child custody situation. And the type of person that I am, I always want to be able to bring calm in a storm. And so I found it very difficult because, those are some of the most difficult times that people will go through in their lives. So I transitioned after a while to a niche in estate planning. And I found that it gave me greater opportunity to give educational awareness to people in the community, and especially people that don't feel like law is accessible to them because they think it's super expensive. Just to make them aware of, if you talk to someone's grandparents and they say, oh yeah, I'm okay because I have a will. And then I tell them, oh gee, I said, a will is better than nothing, but a will won't avoid probate. It won't. And so there's a lot of educational pieces that I get involved in. I work a lot with First AME. They have a caregivers program. That's a very wonderful program. And I have just the opportunity to give back to the community by providing just service and access to legal information for people that are caregivers who are helping an elderly family member or whatnot, but also may need to have a resource information. So it's not all about making money. You definitely got to have the passion for it. And so the passion that I have is to make sure that when people go away from me, that they go away with better than when they came. And so I find that opportunity most greatly in estate planning. And so that's one of the reasons why I practice there. And again, I agree with everybody here that you absolutely have to have the passion for it, because if you don't, you may start out making a lot of money and you will crash and burn because the money won't sustain you. You've got to have personal fulfillment in the work that you're performing. And I know you think it's not true, but it absolutely is true. You've got to have a combination there. Of course, you got to be able to take care of your family because that's why we all work. But you also need to balance that with something that's going to be very meaningful for you as a human being to give back to others beyond the money, because that's what's going to actually sustain you.
Oh, those are great words of advice. Could you elaborate for our listeners a little bit more on the business of the practice of law? A lot of people focus so much on the substantive aspects, and I'm going to pose that question to each of you in a different form. Attorney Blumenfeld, you work in a corporate environment. When I come around to you next, I want you to talk about, give our students some insights into how to advance in a small to medium to large firm environment. Give us some insights into what's that's about, not so much the business of law, so to speak, but it's how do you navigate that environment to improve your own brand within it. And then Professor Seferian, if I can just get your insights working in a large public service office like you do, what advice would you give our students in terms of how to navigate that particular environment as well? So let me go back to Attorney Amerson. You're a sole practitioner. Tell us a little bit about the business of practicing law.
Well, there's one thing when you go to law school and there is some opportunity in the classes that you take to learn about the practice of law. But by and large, learning about the fact that you need to have a trust account and you need to figure out what type of business formation you're going to have. Are you going to go into, is it going to be a legal corporation? Is it going to just be a sole practitioner where it's just a solo owner and it's just the individual? Are you going to partner with other people? And then you have bills. Bills, you have the rent, and you also need to have some sort of library or access to things like Westlaw, LexisNexis, and things so that you can do your research. I found that you need to have a nice, computer software and be able to have the tools success to run your practice, but that means paying bills. That means dealing with vendors, and that means who's going to answer the call if you're a sole practitioner and you don't really have the money because you're just getting started. So figuring out when it's time for you to get help through other services, whether you contract with somebody or if you need to be doing something where it's time to take additional staff on. Those are all things that you will need to know when you're at the point of making enough money to be able to do it. And then you also have to realize when there comes a time where it feels like perhaps you're not making enough money to do it, but the reason why is because you're trying to do everything. And so when you're doing everything, you're doing accounting, you're doing reception work, you're doing clerical work. How much time is that leaving you to actually practice law? So you pay the money for the education and you're spending a great deal of the time doing things that probably can be delegated to somebody else. And with the type of services that you can find these days, Working with people once you establish a relationship is not as difficult as it used to be in the past, but it definitely is something that you need to be prepared to do if you plan to be a sole practitioner.
Great, thank you very much. Attorney Blumenfeld, how about you, sir? How do you navigate the medium to large
I
firm
mean, first of all,
environment? I'm sorry?
First of all, good on you to you. I was saying, first of all, good on you to you. I mean, you sound like Superwoman. You know, running a shop. It's definitely it takes a special person to do that. And wow, I mean, just listening to that. You know, when you come from more of the firm environment, and I've done the boutique firm, I've done the large firm, I've done the national firm. Now I'm back at a boutique firm. A lot of those concerns you obviously don't have because there are people there to do it for you, and your job is to just be a lawyer. But regards to the business, it obviously frees you up more for the business aspect. I definitely recommend people joining networking groups and bar associations, staying in touch with their classmates, for referral sources, really thinking outside the box today when it comes to referral sources, even amongst your classmates, your colleagues, your family. Like I mentioned, bar associations, chambers of commerce, within your own field. We're in networking groups within the bankruptcy practice. So you're constantly, while you're practicing, you're constantly thinking, about business development, and definitely your more senior lawyers, your partners and your senior partners are pushing you to constantly think about marketing and business development. So, it goes without saying, I don't think any of us get to ever just be a lawyer. There's so much more to the practice of law. When you're a law student, it's obviously theory. There's moot court and lawyering skills practicum classes, and it's a start. But until you really get in there, you don't know how much you're actually capable of doing and how much more of a multitasker you're actually qualified to be until you get out there. So it's definitely not a lazy man's sport. You are constantly, the wheels are constantly churning. And from my perspective as a law firm guy, you are constantly thinking marketing and business development, and where am I going to bring in those next dollars to make my partners happy, and obviously keep my job and thrive and succeed.
Yeah, go into that just a little bit further, because most of our students aren't quite really sensitive to that issue of bringing in the business. I mean, how do you do that? How do you find the business?
Like I said, you have to be a hustler. I mean, that's really the name of the game. There are a lot of people that can do what you do, and you just have to sell yourself to say, I can do this and I can do this better, and to make yourself look like I'm the only one that can do this. But believe me, everyone is replaceable, and you have to really sell yourself. It's not for the faint of heart. You're not in the back of the crowd, you're in the front. And you really have to develop that A-type personality. Definitely if you're going to go into litigation, it definitely is a special breed of people. And that goes with business development as well. You have to go and, you have to look someone in the eyes and shake their hands and say, I can do what you need. I can solve your problems, and then go and figure out how to solve it.
That's very wise. Thank you. Professor Seferian, how about you? Give us some insights into how, one advances their career in the big, public service environment.
Well, in the public sector in California, especially at the state level, the process is very formalized. So the whole process is civil service. The application is all formalized. Everyone takes the same application, and the questions are all the same. And the different levels of attorneys are all specified, what requirements are required at each level. So it's a very formal process. And then once someone gets employed, it is a civil service position. So there are civil service requirements that apply, and all the experience requirements are specified. all the salary ranges are specified. And so it's a very formal process. And I think it also requires someone to always keep an eye on that they're working for the public. And so whenever they take an action or make a decision, they have to think, is this action going to be in the public interest? Not just, am I going to win this case or win this motion, but is this something that really benefits the public or advances the public interest? So a person always has to keep that in mind.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Again, to our attorneys, again, insights. We've heard about billing, having to bill. Give our students some insights into billing, in particular, Attorney Amerson and Attorney Blumenfeld. Professor Seferian, I suspect you don't have to actually do the billing, but maybe you do, I'm not sure, but I'd like to hear from, in particular, Attorney Amerson as a solo practitioner and Attorney Blumenfeld in a corporate firm where I know billing is always so important. Share a little bit of insights into that for us.
So from my perspective, billing is one of the things when you're a solo practitioner, there isn't typically someone else that's going to ask for the funds. So you need to get very comfortable with the idea of asking, because people will take your service for free. Believe me, they will. But you have to be confident, and you have to be comfortable telling people what the financial requirements are in order for you to do business with them. And then you have to hold firm on making sure that you actually bill them. And so what I found that is also works for me is web-based software where the billing is done very easily through a client portal, and you can send out regular reminders, the follow-up. So you aren't physically doing a lot of it on your own, and the client is receiving it in both a notification app and also in their email when their bills are done. And then you make it easy for them to pay by credit card using those services. I think billing is something that, is the bread and butter. You've got to make the money, and you've got to be willing and have the courage to ask for what you think you deserve. I think the bigger issue for solo practitioners are, especially when you're first starting out, is what should you charge? That was something that I know that I sort of struggled with. And I think one of the other reasons why it was more difficult for me was because I really came to law school wanting to help and make it accessible to people that it wasn't, maybe didn't feel like it was accessible because they thought it was too expensive. So there was two competing schools of thought in my head, though, that I had to come to terms with in order to make sure that I was running a viable practice, because otherwise you'd be doing, pro bono work, and that's okay too, but you need to be intentional when you decide that you're going to do that. Otherwise you'll have clients that if you just send them a bill here and there and you don't bother them, you let them rack up the bill and you don't get the money, you will take a loss. And Mr. Rokestalis told me that when he was mentoring me, and he was right. And it only takes, one or two $4,000 hits, and then you're like, oh, I got the message. It's okay to be nice, but ask for what the services that you're providing. You must be upfront about that with your clients.
Do you ever turn down clients?
Sometimes you have to. You pick up a knack for that as well. It doesn't come necessarily easy in the beginning, but you really have to have a sense of discernment about listening for certain key things. Like if clients are going through a number of attorneys, that's kind of a red flag to you that this might be a situation that you may not want to involve yourself in. And also you need to do that conflict check just to make sure that you aren't dealing with somebody that's going to create a conflict of interest for you or that person because of some business relationship you have, or because of some other client that you have. So you need to do your due diligence when you're dealing with clients. And even determine, what is their ability to pay you? And perhaps there are people, and there have been for me, especially because, it was very difficult for me because I was already in law enforcement in a managerial assignment and making decent money. So even though I got my law degree and there was a part of me that wanted to start to transition, I also found that when I went on interviews that I would have to accept pay cuts. And I was already married with children, and that just wasn't in the books at the time.
Wow, great, great. Attorney Blumenfeld, how about you, sir?
Sure. So I'll give a little more of a breakdown. So when we say billing, let's say at my firm, it's currently, you have to bill 1,850 hours a year. And that's the base. That's the minimum. So, you could, you break that down into 12 months, into 30 days, into a 5 to 7 day work week. And all of a sudden your head starts spinning going, how am I going to get through that? And, and the rest of my life. And you do. And this is why we keep saying you better love this profession, because it's it's your first love. It's your mistress. It's your best friend. And you still have other requirements. So on top of that, like I said, you have to, and we bill in 6-minute increments, as I'm sure everyone else does. And you are constantly thinking bill, bill, bill. And if you're not, your partners and your higher ups and your accounting department is telling you, you better bill, 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 and you better get in your time. And unfortunately, you can't actually bill for the time that you're billing. Anything administrative, you just kind of have to suck up those hours. And there's a lot of those hours that you can't, get credit for. It's just part of the profession. Business development and networking, you can let them know, let the firm know that you're working on it, but obviously it doesn't go to your 1850 that you're required to hit. And again, if someone's thinking, okay, 1850, it's tough, but it's doable. It's a lot harder than it looks at first, because you can sit in the office 12 to 15 hours a day, let's say your first 1 to 3, 4 years, especially with learning curve. But you can't actually bill every minute that you're there. You go to lunch, you go to the restroom, your mom calls you, you got to turn that meter off. So in a 12-hour day, you might only get 6 to 8 hours that are actually billable. And then you'll actually think that you billed more, and then you'll find out at the end of the month, the partners have slashed your hours because you took, 4 hours to do a 1-hour assignment. So all of a sudden that 1850 is a lot more difficult. And obviously, as the end of the years roll around, November, December, as an associate, you are working double time, you are working weekends to try and hit those hours. And then you realize that if you cross the 1850 threshold, that, that's where the bonuses happen. So 1850 is just to basically keep your job. And then if you want to exceed and thrive and hopefully, make partner one day and show that initiative, you're going to want to exceed it, and a lot more attorneys do than you think, because it's almost a mandatory expectation these days. You can't just be I don't know what's the term today, basic. No one, you can't succeed at 1850, and by succeed, it's kind of like keep your job. You need to be better. So you are constantly thinking, how am I going to bill, and where am I going to get my hours? And maybe I'll join this trial team or that trial team, and then you can, pretty much bill the whole day out. This pandemic, I'll throw a personal anecdote. This pandemic has actually made it a little more difficult on billing, because pre-pandemic, we could bill and charge for our drive time to court. So I could have a hearing in Santa Ana and drive 2 hours each way, and and that right there alone is 4 hours. Today, courts are closed. You're just doing it by the phone. So, what was once 5 or 6 hours billing for a 15-minute status conference, you were literally just billing 15 minutes. So now you have to work that much harder as a litigation associate to find those hours.
Oh, great. Wow, great insights. Thank you so much. Professor Seferian, I suspect you don't have the challenges of billing and finding clients, but can you give us into other insights about the challenges that one faces in the public sector in terms of the practice of law?
Well, you're right about there's not a challenge of finding clients. The clients are already other state agencies or actions that are brought in the public interest. However, there is also billing requirement. So some of our time is billed to the Department of Justice directly. And then the Department of Justice also represents other state agencies. And so when we're working for another state agency, that time is billed to the other state agency. And all the state agencies are on extremely tight budgets. And so we have the same concerns about billing to other state agencies because the money comes out of their budgets. And so there are strict billing requirements that have to be satisfied also.
Wow. Wow, that's fascinating. Fascinating. We've only got a few more minutes now. This has been a absolutely very fascinating conversation. I wish we could go on for another hour or so we could, gain even more insights for our students. But in closing, I'd like to give each of you 3 minutes. What advice would you give our students and alums? And how about prospective students? What insights, what words of wisdom would you provide them on whether or not going into the practice of law is the right thing for them? Professor Seferian, we'll start with you, sir.
Well, I think the law is a very important way to affect social change. And so for people who want to make a difference, try to improve the lives of others, going into law is a great way to do that. And so I think if you do that, you want to keep in mind that it's always important to care about the work that you're doing and care about the effect that your work is having on others and having on society. And to try to find a job that you love. And if it's not the first job that you have, then try to find another job or a third job. And as was mentioned previously, to always try to find a position, a line of work that's going to bring you satisfaction and fulfillment, and that's going to try to make a difference in other people's lives.
Attorney Blumenfeld, how about you, sir? Thank you.
Sure. So we get asked this question a lot, I think, throughout of, why are you a lawyer and should I go to law school? And I keep going back to the adage of you really want to do this. I wouldn't, to the prospective students, especially that are listening, law school isn't I don't know what I'm going to do, so let me go to law school and try this. I have found you won't be successful. You really need to want to go to law school. And, whether or not you actually want to practice law is another subject for another day, but you really need to want to go to law school. It takes over. Law school takes over. That first year, all the scary stories, the majority of them are true. But you do it with your classmates, and that becomes the joy of that is coming out on the other side, and you get those stories to tell forever. It's more reading than you've ever done, and it's studying and practicing with the language that you're unfamiliar with. Other than watching episodes of Law and Order, you really don't know until you're in there. You have to love it. You have to make it a priority. You definitely will get out of it what you put in it. And for any, all of us here on the panel and other attorneys that are viewing, it's amazing how many years go by, but you still remember being a law student. You still remember your experience of taking the bar. You definitely remember the night that you found out you passed the bar. And it's amazing. I mean, you will never forget those experiences. And all of us, we have up and down days as lawyers. But those joys you never forget. And those are the joys that, remind me, I do what I do other than, having successes with clients and seeing them through. I just want to say it's definitely been an honor to speak tonight. I've, been involved with UWLA since I was a student. When did I start? I'm going to age myself now. 2004 is when I entered law school. So almost 17 years now, I've been involved with the University of West Los Angeles, and I'm definitely looking forward to the next 17 years and seeing this institution, grow and grow and grow. And further, as a board member on the board of managers, I get the privilege every year of sitting on that stage and watching as new graduates take their diploma and take their photos now with Professor Frickberg, with Dean Frickberg, excuse me. And, you know, I only hope for the current students and the future ones that decide to attend at UWLA that I'll get to see you cross that stage. And believe me, I'll be as proud of you as I was of myself, you know, when it was my turn to take that stage. So, you know, I really hope for those prospective students seriously consider it and definitely consider attending UWLA. And for the current students, you know, keep pushing. You're entering a wonderful profession with a lot of perks and a lot of joys. And good luck to everyone.
Wow, Corey, thank you so much, Attorney Blumenfeld. Those are wonderful words of and very wise and very insightful. Thank you so much. We're honored to have you. I'm honored to have you as one of my bosses for all these years, and I can't thank you enough for the contributions that you've made to UWLA, both internally and externally. Thank you. Attorney Amerson, how about you?
So the advice that I have is really to be true to yourself. You can go to law school because somebody else wants you to do it, but as was stated before, you really got to have a heart for it. You have to be willing to, as they say, grind, get down to get into those books and studying and foregoing your friends that are going out to have a great time once we finally come out of COVID. You have to be willing to dedicate 110% of yourself to law school. And I think for me, having gone through the police academy, which is a very similar, grueling experience, I noticed that there's some similarities. And when you make those connections with your classmates, there are things that you will be overcoming together. And so it brings about a certain level of camaraderie. And so as we talk a little bit about camaraderie, I also suggest highly, and I see that somebody is reaching out to me via the chat now, please take the opportunity to connect with other people. I'm looking now to just the people that I'm on the panel with. This is an opportunity to connect with people. There's a referral opportunity because I don't do bankruptcy. And then another civil servant experience that I can learn from. So always take the time to learn what you can from other people, and don't always go with your hand out, wanting something. Go wanting to give something. And so make the connections while you're in law school or even before you join UWLA with other people that are doing things that you think you might be interested in. And because they're going to be honest with you and tell you it is not for the faint at heart. You have to be dedicated to it, and you got to be willing to put the time into making yourself successful. You don't just learn these things overnight. And those of you that are already in law school and you're struggling, did I ever think I would actually go to law school, pass the bar on the first time after having been on bed rest because I was pregnant and having complications and listening to tapes? Some of them I couldn't understand what was being said. I didn't, but you can do it when you put your mind to it. If you're dedicated to getting it done, you will get it done. And I think UWLA is just, it was the place for me to do that. So if you have a situation where you think that you want to go to law school, connect with other people and learn about what their law school experiences have been. It is a new language, though. You know, when you're there and you get your papers back and they're telling you they're too conclusionary and you're wondering, what does conclusionary mean? So it's a wonderful opportunity if this is what you want to do. And I also want to say that outside of practicing, I think that my law degree has helped me excel the ranks, as which was stated earlier. I was the first commander and the first internal female assistant chief of police for my agency. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I have a law degree and I have strong analytical skills, and those are needed in most every aspect of your life. And that is the difference between having a basic knowledge and really being able to pull back an onion on many different things. So it has been a tremendous attribute for me in law enforcement, on the administrative side of law enforcement, dealing with labor organizations and all sorts of things. So do I think that it helps you even if you don't really want to practice? It's so much more than that. It's a great opportunity if you really have it in your heart to do it. And if you really don't put yourself through that.
Wow, this has been outstanding. This has been absolutely excellent. I can't thank each of you enough. Latasha Wells Amerson, Professor Anthony Seferian, Mr. Ori Blumenfeld. I can't again express enough to you how much we appreciate your contributions, your participation, how much you've been able to convey to our students that I think will be very valuable and insightful for them for the future. With this, we will conclude our panel. To those of you who are out there, I would recommend that you look to all of our panelists for mentorship at some point in time. I know that each of them enjoy that. And with that, we will conclude our panel presentation. Again, thanks to each of you panelists. You've been just absolutely excellent. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.